Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Disruption Drives. I have a very, very special guest with me today. Back in 2018, when I was at Avis Car Rental and trying to just learn about this new wild world of autonomous vehicles, I happened to pick up a book. And I was immensely pleased to learn that, well, it was written by a former consultant, who, of course, I learned from looking at his background that he's not just a strategy consultant, but has been a CEO, operator, an investor, author, and thinker. Probably one of the most articulate and intelligent people following this space today. And I cannot be more pleased to welcome someone I've started considering a mentor and a deep friend, Michael McGrath.
Thank you,
Michael
Harry.
Michael is the founder of PRTM, one of the most prestigious consulting firms, which is now part of the PwC network, PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I spent time as part of strategy. And he's also been a chairman of the board at National Instruments, among others, and I2 Technologies, and he's considered a world expert in product strategy and all things disruption. So, Michael, want to thank you for your time and want to sort of get your maybe start off with, look, you've been following this space since 2018 and even before that. What got you into this?
It's actually very simple. I semi-retired a couple times, and tried to see what my interests were. And I looked and I said, autonomous vehicles are going to be the most important change in the rest of my life. And so I thought I might as well learn about them. I originally poo-pooed them, and I decided to learn more about them. And as I did, I got more excited. And then I thought, if I'm going to learn about them, I might as well write a book on them, and I might as well try to be an expert on them. So that's how my journey began, 7 years ago, when I first tackled this whole area. And boy, my expectations were really high. They're still high, but it's taken a lot longer than I could have ever expected, and anybody expected.
Absolutely, Michael. You started with in 2018, and now it's 2025, 7 years, and you published your first edition in 2018 when I think I picked it up. What do you think? What do you think you've gotten right, and also what do you think is not? What were some of those predictions that were differently?
Well, my optimism about the market and the opportunity has been correct. The time frame has been way off. My prediction of the companies that would be leaders in this market has changed dramatically. So much has changed even in the last 4 or 5 years. I originally predicted, one of the leaders would be GM Cruise. I predicted that Apple would come into this market in a big way. Both of those have exited, as well as Ford and some others. And it's just taken a lot more time, a lot more billions and billions of dollars, and a lot more patience than anybody expected. The benefits are still there, but the time frame has really taken a lot longer. $100 billion, I estimate, has been put into this, maybe close to 150 billion now, and it's going to take a lot more still.
Amazing, 150 billion. And so we can definitely delve into each of these topics at length. Couple of things to summarize. So you're definitely talking about you predicted some of the legacy fleet players to win, General Motors.
Yeah.
Obviously, but then in reality, an Apple, of course, is a hardware manufacturer, of course, with software win. But in reality, we're seeing Alphabet, Waymo,
Yeah.
Tesla. You're seeing Pony.ai, Baidu from the Chinese ecosystem.
Right.
And of course, a series of startups are launching very much in this space.
Right.
And so, what do you think, as it stands right now? Where do you think those differentiating capabilities lie with this?
Well, first of all, one really big firm conclusion I have now that a lot of people don't see: Tesla is not a viable player in the autonomous ride-hailing services market. I have looked at this issue over and over again. I've written about it many times. I write articles for Seeking Alpha and have recommended basically selling the stock. Now, I have to tell you, I own a Tesla. I've had 3 Teslas. I love my Tesla, but it's not a robo-taxi kind of vehicle. Their whole strategy is incorrect. So Waymo has it right. They're the leader. And the strategy for Tesla, I just discount completely.
Let's dive deep on that, Michael.
Okay.
There are people who would say that there's Waymo is geofenced,
right,
Tesla has petabytes of video information that they haven't learned how to use, but if any,
right,
they can.
right,
And there's all sorts of this, generative AI and disruptions that make those relatively straightforward. There is a theory that
right.
Tesla is more scalable, and there's of course a very theory that Waymo is more tested. But would like your thoughts on that. Where do you think the chips are falling?
The autonomous ride-hailing services is a municipal market-based service, just as Uber was in the beginning and still is pretty much. It's a municipal-based service that's geofenced, and it's driven by high-definition maps in that geofencing. So Tesla's strategy of saying somebody can get a Tesla robo-taxi and go any place at any time was level 5 automation. It's not viable. I drive a Tesla all the time. I have full self-drive. I'm usually on the beta test versions of it. It works. It's fun. It's a little bit dangerous. It's fun. But here's some examples. Okay. How can a Tesla robo-taxi get into a gated community? How can a Tesla robo-taxi pull up next to your wife's car and double park on the driveway? How can a Tesla robo-taxi, they have problems with right-hand turns. They can't get out of a parking lot. So for example, I get in my Tesla, I push the button home, autonomous self-driving on it, full self-drive, and it's in a parking lot. It looks at the cameras, it sees an exit, and it goes right out the entrance that's one way into the parking lot because it doesn't know that that nearest road to go out is one way, the wrong way. They don't know that it's an entrance only road coming in. It only, and with Waymo with the high definition maps, they mark that as saying if you want to exit this parking lot, you have to go out this way, not the way the camera sees an empty road.
Right.
Um, there's just so many limitations that, and you know, every municipality, and one of the things I write in my book, which is dazzles me is all of the state level and federal regulations and municipal regulations on autonomous vehicles. Another quick example. In any municipal area, an autonomous vehicle company needs to coordinate with first responders. They have to work with them. They have to have a plan for that municipality. They have to know how to, they have to know how to handle that vehicle. They have to train firefighters and police how to handle like the Waymo vehicle that's disabled. So is Tesla going to send out 1 million people to go to 1 million communities to train firefighters and police? No, they're just going to let them run dangerous, and they won't. Another thing is, you get a Tesla, if you get a Waymo or even an Uber now, and you want to go to the airport or a hotel, you don't just drive up to that address. You have to know where the drop-off point for ride sharing is for that hotel, which is usually in a parking garage, or the airport, which is usually in a parking garage. And you have to coordinate that and put it in your map so that when someone says, I want to go to the airport, it takes you to the right drop-off location. And a lot of municipalities will do that for busy areas too. They'll say, this is the drop-off corner for ride sharing. And it's not, all of those things are municipal based. And that requires a fleet of cars that are programmed for that municipal area. It requires geofencing, and the geofencing will restrict certain areas. Now, geofencing, for example, will if you go through a school zone, sometimes school zones have signs with flashing speed limits when school's in session, which is a different speed limit from the speed limits posted. Okay, I went through one the other day. The speed limit was 35 miles an hour. The school zone speed limit was reduced to 15. My Tesla blew right through the school zone at not 15, but 35. Whereas with Waymo, they'll program it to say to the vehicle, look at that sign. Or more likely, what they'll do in the early days is say, don't go by the school zone, go around it.
Right,
you
right.
know, bypass it. That's what the geofencing does. So Tesla's rollout of being able to have a Tesla go any place is just not, it's not viable. And I love Tesla. I love my Tesla. I think the company is extremely overvalued. It was an investment because it's valued based on an ultimate rollout of robotaxi, and it's not viable. In fact, I just bought my new Tesla by shorting Tesla stock.
And Tesla is a good car, bad
Yeah.
autonomous vehicle technology. But let me
Right.
dive deep on,
No, it's a good autonomous vehicle technology. It's a level two technology,
right.
level two plus technology.
I
It's
see.
the best level two technology out there. It'll stop at red lights. It'll turn. I mean, it does a lot of things, but it can't do an infinite number of things. And the other concept that people have their Tesla pull out of their garage and go to pick up somebody instead of investing in a fleet is also flawed. Um, as is the cyber cap strategy of a two vehicle inductive charging car is flawed. So it's just not going to happen the way he's promised it. It's going to
Absolutely.
fail.
Let's get to one of your, of course, big bets, which is you've always seen autonomous ride hailing and ride sharing services
Yeah.
the early adopters. At
Right.
this point, we are seeing, of course, several other segments as well, industrial goods movement,
Mhm.
delivery. Uh,
Right.
and so where do you think those chips are falling? I mean, autonomous, you've always believed in ride hailing being those first. And now we're seeing that.
Right.
Lyft and
Right.
Uber have started investing in
Right.
becoming aggregators of autonomous ride hailing services.
Right. Right. It's a good question. Originally, I thought back 7 years ago that ride hailing would be a big market. So would a lot autonomous long haul trucking and autonomous delivery, food and grocery delivery, not package delivery. Uh, since then, what's happened is more resources have gone into autonomous ride hailing, like Waymo, Zoox, which I also think is interesting. Um, and and the companies that were in some of those other markets have backed off or gone out of business. Um, a number of the startups in autonomous long haul trucking, like Too Simple and Embark, have gone out of business. Others have slowed down because the capital requirements for those were more startup companies. The capital requirements just became enormous, and they couldn't afford it.
Let's
And
hear
at home
more.
home delivery, home
Yeah.
delivery, I think is a great market opportunity, but there really isn't anybody in that market.
Well,
No.
Neuro, I would think they've got, also the 555 regulation exemption as well, and they're the only one. But I know that they're
Yeah, but Neuro, I was really high on Neuro. I would have invested money in Neuro. I would have gone on their board of directors if I could. And then they changed their whole strategy. They dropped their whole strategy recently, earlier this year. And instead, they're looking at selling their technology, licensing their software technology instead of home delivery, because they couldn't overcome the capital requirements,
right.
which are billions of dollars. I mean, their vehicle they had designed is wonderful. They just couldn't build them in quantities and release them fast enough. The capital requirements are in the billions of dollars. And the mistake they made was they should have gone public when they could have and had access to more capital. Aurora did that and had access to more capital. And Neuro didn't. And other than Neuro, there really isn't. And everybody else is going to look at it as a secondary market to autonomous ride hailing. Once they do that, then they'll do delivery.
You're talking about an autonomous ride hail services, of course, which fundamentally passenger transport, more complicated than I would say moving goods at a fundamental level,
Right.
given
Right.
the unpredictable, much more capital intensive. But of course, you've got big players like Zoox,
Yeah.
Alphabet, and Tesla running
Right.
that space. But let's
Right.
talk a bit about the landscape itself. There seems like there's a Tesla play, there's an Alphabet Waymo play. There's also the Pony.ai Baidu Chinese play, which tend to be focused on sort of, large scale, very dense infrastructure environments and
Mhm.
unpredictable environments. Uh,
Right.
what are your thoughts on those? Because there's a very real, I mean, uh, this technology is now available around the planet.
It is. The Chinese market. First of all, I think autonomous ride hailing is going to be as I said, a municipal market. It's not a global market unless, I mean, if Uber acquired one of those companies, then it changes the game. But assuming they don't, the Chinese companies can't come into the U.S. market by restriction right now. And the current administration won't let them come in and do that. So they're currently limited to the Chinese market. There's about 2,000 autonomous vehicles doing ride hailing now in China. You know, and I think Apollo was the leader with about 1,000. Uh, and so they're about the same place as Waymo is, but I think they'll go a lot faster. Their technology is, I don't know if it's as robust, but it's a little bit more liberal market. It's all also a very big ride-hailing market, ride-sharing market now. So in China, more people do that than own cars. So it's a bigger market opportunity, and the Chinese government's encouraging it. So um, I think that market will be developed separate from the U.S. market. The U.S. market for ride-hailing is current mobility, let's say, is a broader category. It's about $100 billion today. So it's a big market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there is a theory as well that China, given obviously still a developing country in relative terms, has a more complex multimodal road, not
Hmm.
necessarily as well developed, and therefore they've learned to operate in all sorts of conditions rather than a Waymo that started with Phoenix and Los Angeles, which were relatively simpler cities.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, no, I think I don't, I haven't tried their technology, so I don't know, but um, I think that's very possible. But that doesn't, but I don't think Waymo will go into the Chinese market. Tesla can't even get their full self-drive into China. Those two markets are really barred from each other. So competitors in that market can't compete in the US and vice versa right now. So
Absolutely.
that may change, but um, right now they're separate markets. But it's a good one to follow.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Let me segue back into what you said. Look, enormous capital investments required.
Hmm.
Technology players are tending to win more than the fleet players at the same time. Where do you think the barriers are? And at the same time, look, I mean, technology, of course, becomes the general cost of technology goes down over time.
Right.
I think you've built one of the most, I think, comprehensive total cost of ownership models.
Hmm.
The bet you're making is that, currently, right, Ubers and Lyfts cost about, $2.25 an hour. You've
Hmm.
also said, of course, autonomous ride hailing will be a lot cheaper, maybe go up to about 50 cents an hour.
Per
What
mile. Per, per
what
mile.
needs to happen for that to happen? And at that point, of course, traffic and ride hailing is going to be democratized to anyone.
Right. Well, first of all, that's the 50 cents is a direct cost, so it doesn't include administration, marketing, R&D, which could add another 50 cents to the total cost of any company that's providing the service. I mean, that if you just take those numbers for what Uber has, their overhead numbers are about that, per mile. Um, the two things that are important here, one is utilization. The vehicle costs are very high, um, and utilization is critical. If you can get 40, 50, 60% utilization versus 30% utilization of a vehicle, then it's going to be a lot lower cost. And they'll be able to do that. One of the reasons they'll do that is through cherry picking. They don't have to have. There's about 1 million Uber drivers now. So let's say there's 1 million Uber vehicles providing that service. You don't need 1 million autonomous vehicles. You only need maybe 100,000 to provide the same level of service. But for the initial period, they'll just cherry pick and they'll have high utilization on the best routes and be able to charge lower prices. Although one of the things that's changed is that market reception so far has been that people are willing to pay more for an autonomous ride than an Uber ride. Now that caught
Cool.
me by surprise.
Right.
Yeah, not everybody, but many more people. They just feel better.
But the implication of what you say, of course, is that you don't think congestion, at least for the short term, will be as big an issue as sometimes predicted. Because, Uber and Lyft came into the market saying we'll reduce congestion, take off
Right,
owned cars off the streets. Well, the opposite happened.
right, right.
And well, Uber is now a industry that created industries that frankly no one predicted.
Yeah,
Autonomous vehicles, you actually think, at least in the short term, will reduce congestion because fewer cars are required on the street.
right, right. I think it'll reduce congestion. There, autonomous vehicles, the optimization can get better than Uber drivers. So Uber drivers are incented by surge pricing, for example.
Right.
They're also incented to be around where they may get a ride. So they cruise around sometimes, and they're waiting to get the best rides. They want to get the rides to the airport, so they're maybe cruising around hotels or whatever. Um, Whereas I think autonomous vehicles being centralized with sophisticated software can optimize routes much better, and I think that's going to be an advantage in congestion, but that still remains to be seen. And of course, the ultimate goal is that when almost every vehicle is autonomous. You'll be able to get congestion reduced by having people traffic lights synchronized with cars and cars knowing, you know,
We
we're
do
5 seconds from a red light, so do this or whatever. So,
absolutely.
but that's much longer term. That's more of a longer term than I worry about.
Absolutely. So Michael, again, I want to maybe ask you some parting thoughts, right? How do you think barriers to entry are changing? And particularly, you mentioned, look, large capital requirements, which can be conquered,
Mhm.
expertise in technology, which of course is now becoming more accessible with generative AI, AI writing most code,
Mhm.
and your predictions of, General Motors or Ford being winners have actually ended up being the other way opposite, where,
Right.
technology companies have tended to win. Now, of course, they're still big technology companies. Is this a startups world now? Is it 2025 changing that inflection point because you've seen, or is it still a very much an incumbent large technology player, maybe a Meta or an Apple sort of play, but really a
Mhm.
Google versus Amazon versus Baidu play?
I, it, for the mainstream market, whether when you have to produce you know uh, tens of thousands of vehicles that are autonomous and roll them out across the country, those are big deep pocket companies, like Google, like Amazon. I mean, deeper pockets than Ford and GM, for example. But it's also creating a whole bunch of niche markets, which are still just becoming apparent. One of the companies I've kind of looked at recently is um, I guess it's Move, Moove.
Yeah.
I guess it's pronounced Move. I don't know. There's two O's in it, but and they have they're raising about $1.5 billion. They're an African company,
Right.
a small company, and what they're going to do is finance Waymo vehicles for Waymo and provide them and service them. And so they're providing cars for Uber, for drivers. They're servicing Waymo vehicles in Miami. So the niches like that for startup companies, and there's a lot more things like that, having to do with maps, having to do with coordination, having to do with optimization. So I think as the market emerges, there's going to be niches for startup companies will be fascinating, but not the mainstream market now is deep pockets for
Absolutely.
all of them. Um,
Well, Michael, once again, thank you for your time. This has been a fascinating, amazing conversation, as always. And we could pick on every single topic we talked about and do a deep dive, which I hope we will soon enough.
yes.
But for now, again, wanted to thank Michael. Thank you so much for this conversation. And, autonomous vehicles, strategies and disruptions, strategies and opportunities available on Amazon. All of you should read it. It taught me everything I know today. Once again, thank you, Michael. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Harry. I always appreciate our conversations. You get me thinking about things more, even. Thank you.
Absolutely.